thank you all for showing up. So welcome to today's talk on the changing nature of digital spying. I'm mainly going to discuss a certain type of surveillance that takes the form of active intrusion into digital devices. From being relatively unknown to most people a few years ago, this has become a $5 billion a year industry overnight. So I'm Marquis-Boire. There's a second name up there because I wanted to mention him. I did a significant portion of this work with a guy named Bill Marchak from a group called Bahrain Watch, who's also at Berkeley University. I just wanted to, so a lot of the work that this references is published under his name as well. Now, I work as a security engineer at Google, but in addition to that, I've actually done a lot of work with the Citizen Lab, which is a think tank out of the University of Toronto, who focus on the intersection of digital media, human rights, and security, and also with the Electronic Frontier Foundation in San Francisco. So, obviously, if I say horrible things about people, this is me and not Google. So earlier this year, or last year actually, sort of around the middle of last year, I gave a talk at Black Hat called CuteCats.exe and the Arab Spring. And actually, before I continue, just to get a sense of the room, how many people here are engineers or technologists? Oh, okay, cool. So, you know, just, the CuteCats.exe joke might have been lost on some people. So the title of that presentation referred to a wave of demonstrations and protests that were sort of going around the Arab world, and obviously there's a malware joke because if you receive something called CuteCats.exe, then you probably shouldn't run this because this is probably, well, you might get cute cats, but you'll probably get other stuff too. And it's also a reference to a theory developed by Ethan Zuckerman in 2008. So what he postulated was that most people who use the internet aren't particularly interested in activism or revolutions or causes. They want to look at cute cats and pornography and whatever else people do with the internet. But the tools that are developed for sharing pictures, whatever they are, such as Facebook or Tumblr or Twitter or Blogger or whatever, are nonetheless very useful to social movement activists who lack the resources to develop dedicated tools themselves. He then goes on to stipulate that this subsequently makes activists more immune to reprisals by governments than if they were using dedicated activism platforms, because messing with people's cute cats and pornography really pisses them off, whereas removing obscure activist resources doesn't produce much public outrage at all. So I came up with a corollary theory, which was the CuteCats.exe theory of digital activism, which was that once a platform attracted a critical mass of activists, that platform would be used to target them. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard the so-called Arab Spring described as, or parts thereof, described as the Twitter revolution or the Facebook revolution, or, I don't necessarily agree with these phrases, but they reflect the usefulness of the platforms that Ethan Zuckerman describes in the organization of social movements. People that orchestrate surveillance campaigns are also familiar with this idea. Unsurprisingly, the targeting of dissidents across several countries involved in the Arab Spring has played on the usefulness of Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Skype, and other popular platforms. So, as everyone is probably aware, there was an extended period of unrest that is still ongoing in Syria. Protests began in around January 2011, spread into a nationwide uprising. At the moment, it's still ongoing. Since the beginning of the physical conflict, a digital campaign has been running against the opponents of Assad's regime. While this wasn't publicly unearthed until early in 2012, evidence points to this campaign starting around November of 2011 or earlier. So around Christmas of 2011, a group of activists that was providing technical support to the uprising was arrested. One of their number who remained unarrested received a Skype message from the account of one of his captured friends suggesting that in order to avoid the spying of the regime, it would be a really good idea if he installed this tool. And obviously, he wanted to avoid spying, and so he did. And then, on reflection, he realized that his friend was in jail, and this was actually probably a really stupid thing that he had just done. And so he sought outside aid. And so his hard drive wormed its way around the world by virtue of, high-speed FedEx and this sort of thing, and found its way to forensic analysts in the West. On examination of the hard drive, it was discovered a remote access Trojan which provided significant capability for remote surveillance of its victims. You could watch people through their webcam, record their keystrokes, passwords to accounts, this type of thing. In addition to this particular Trojan, though, this machine was found to have been twice previously targeted by what appeared to be the same actors. So on February 17th, CNN reported that spyware was the newest weapon in the Syrian conflict, and reported on the widespread hijacking of activist accounts as well as the targeting of dissidents. Since this time, we've actually been able to track multiple persistent campaigns targeting opponents of the current regime in Syria. And the preferred methods of these groups generally seems to be targeting people via the compromised Skype accounts of their trusted friends, as well as through social networks used to organize elements of the revolution. So the guy you see there is Burhan Ghalioun, who at the time was the head of the Syrian Opposition Transnational Council. Now, he had about 6,000 Facebook friends. And then one day, in what looked to be a post from him, there was a link saying, we're very worried about digital security and surveillance. You should really install this additional software. And that led his 6,000 friends and other people who were sympathetic to the cause to visit once you click the link, to visit this page. Which is interesting because this actually doesn't really look like a Facebook page on the face of it if you look closely. But what this did was it purportedly offered to download something to do with Facebook security. And when you downloaded it, what it did was it installed a keylogger, which would then send all of your credentials to a remote server in Syrian Telecommunications Establishment address space, which is the government-owned telco there. So we looked at this campaign and managed to trace it back to this compromised website. And what was interesting is that we actually found that they'd staged about 4 or 5 campaigns from this compromised website, all of different kinds. So there was this one, Facebook browser, this one. The interesting thing about these, obviously, is that they kind of look like Facebook pages, but actually not. So faked websites has actually been a popular thing. This one is a faked UN website. And what it does is it says, do you think that the current regime in Syria should be tried for war crimes? And if you say yes, then it suggests that, in order to register your vote, you need to enter your credentials for Google, Skype, or Windows Live. This one was a fake Skype website, and you may have heard of, there was the alleged suicide bombing of 3 senior military officials in Damascus. And emails were sent to pro-revolution mailing lists alleging that the website seen here contained the last Skype phone call between the Minister of Defense and his wife for his death. If you click on it and try to listen to the phone call, it then asks you for your Skype credentials to log in. Again, I'm not entirely sure why Skype would be hosting this content, but this type of topical engineering is a real feature of these campaigns. In March of last year, someone started seeding pro-revolutionary forums on Facebook with messages which suggested that the link that accompanied them contained videos of atrocities committed against women, like largely sort of raped by soldiers in various towns by sort of Assad soldiers. Clicking the link led to a fraudulent YouTube page. So this actually looks a lot like one of the pro-revolutionary YouTube channels. So YouTube has actually been important in the sort of ongoing conflict in Syria because of the ban on foreign journalists. So YouTube allows people to sort of post videos of this sort of ongoing violence. However, this particular fake YouTube site, if you attempt to watch any of the videos, just informs you that you need to upgrade your version of Flash. Like any message on the internet which informs you that you need to upgrade your version of Flash, this installs malware. And again, it talks back to command and control server inside Syrian address space. Much of the social engineering with these campaigns has remained very stealthy. This alleged to be revolutionary plans for the formation of a high council after the revolution. And again, installed the same remote access toolkit that I described earlier. This one pretended to be a 0-hour plan for the city of Aleppo. Again, the purported documents installed a Trojan. However, I mean, what's interesting here is that this is actually like a really long PDF, which actually looks really legitimate. So the likelihood that it's just going to be passed around activist networks by people who actually want to know if this is real or not is reasonably high. I mean, you can actually get people to just send, I mean, it's enticing enough that people will want to send it to each other. However, you know, there's been sort of extensive education campaigns, and people have sort of grown more aware of the dangers that this type of attacks pose. For instance, Timur Karim was a Syrian sort of pro-democracy activist who was captured and tortured by the Syrian police. And despite not telling them anything, it didn't matter because his digital records had already told them everything. They had transcripts of all his Skype conversations and his chat conversations and this sort of thing. And as he described it, my computer was arrested before me. So there's the Union of Free Syrian Students on Facebook started an album of students holding up warning signs against phishing attacks and malware with messages that said things like, Assad supporters are sending dangerous files with hacked accounts, check with your friends before opening an attachment. Then what we saw, interestingly, was actually a change in the style of campaigns targeting activists sort of following this. For instance, in May, last year, it was widely reported that Skype leaked your IP and that people were very worried about this because if the government could trace your IP, they could then trace your location, bad things happen. And so we saw campaigns change from being fake revolutionary documents to fake tools. So this one was alleged to be a Skype encryption tool, which would protect you from IP leaks and that sort of thing, which again went back actually to the same IP ranges. Installed the same malware, talked to the same IP ranges in Syrian telecommunication space. It was actually hosted on one of the same websites as some previous attacks that I'd seen. They actually did fix the misspelling in encryption there, but because I was watching it, I was like, this is too hilarious, so I got a screenshot as they were doing it. So note here, I mean, this is what they actually created this entire fake app. This didn't actually encrypt Skype phone calls at all, and any security application which looks like it uses Comic Sans, you should just not use anyway, regardless of what it does. We also saw this one, which was, again, by the same people. This was Anti-Hacker.exe. I'm not even sure what this was supposed to do, other than provide security. But, it was clearly supposed to entice people to install it. And apparently your PC is protect now, for using our product. But it doesn't actually protect against anything, but does facilitate the installation of a remote surveillance backdoor. So in this specific case, the malware was a tool called Dark Comet, which was a remote access toolkit which was written by a young French guy that became heavily associated with the Syrian revolution due to its persistent use by sort of pro-Syrian government actors. At the same time, we saw another rat, which is very similar, called Black Shades rat. And these are kind of cheap tools. Dark Comet was free. Black Shades was between 60 and 200 euros, depending on how much, what type of, what sort of variant of the toolkit you purchased. So the malware itself wasn't that great. But what was interesting is the sort of persistent duration of this campaign and its sort of targeted nature against a group of very high-risk users. As I sort of wondered, though, like, why we were seeing this. So obviously having pro-regime electronic actors watching you via your webcam and faking messages to your social network and watching all your communications is bad, and it's scary, and it's invasive. But regimes harvesting people's communications isn't particularly new. A lot of people are familiar with massive intercept surveillance. Are a lot of people here familiar with massive intercept? Most people know what DPI is and that sort of thing? Yeah? Okay, so you probably heard of Narus. They were a surveillance vendor that was implicated in providing technology to Iran for spying and censorship. You guys have probably heard of these guys, Amethyst. So they're this was the first, on Google Images, this is the first picture of their logo you get, actually. So they're a French company who was, they were found to be used by the regime in Libya. People weren't very impressed with that. So you sort of saw a lot of headlines like this, right? I mean, there was a judicial probe into their activities, and people were trying to, seriously contemplating whether or not this firm was sort of complicit in torture. So, I mean, this type of technology, generally, one installs a traffic inspection box at a choke point on your network. So if you're an ISP, a provider, and if you've got, large high-capacity devices, you stick them on peering exchanges and so forth, and they give you the capacity to perform different types of real-time awareness of your network, I think is the phrase. But basically it allows you to sort of inspect traffic and then perform actions on it, be it to sort of store data about it or block certain types of it. So a lot of people have probably heard of Blue Coat, and there was a lot of media attention around Blue Coat because they were found to be used in by the Syrian government. A group called Telecomics found some, I think they were proxy SG9000 boxes, about 14 of them, in Syrian address space, performing what appeared to be censorship and surveillance. And this is actually illegal because Syria was under sanction by the US government. And they also found logs of the devices, and those were leaked. And then shortly afterwards, it came out that Blue Coat was also being used in Saudi Arabia for surveillance and monitoring. And yeah, I sort of read these headlines, they passed, and then being an engineer, I was like, why is something being used in one place or another place? Why are we discovering things so slowly? We should automate. And so I scanned the whole world for Blue Coat boxes. And I found 371, actually I found a lot more than 371 Blue Coat boxes, but I found 371 Blue Coat boxes that were of a decent size enough to perform interesting types of network surveillance and censorship. And this map, the black areas are no Blue Coat boxes found. The gray areas are Blue Coat boxes found on commercial networks. So for instance, or this type of technology isn't all bad, right? So maybe it's being used in libraries to prevent children from seeing pornographic material, or other wholesome reasons as to why people might use censorship and surveillance. But the gray areas, so those are the gray areas. The blue areas, however, where we found these boxes on ISP or provider networks, and in countries that had a history of human rights abuses. And so we found 61 appliances which actually fit that category in places like Egypt, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Afghanistan, Bahrain, China, India, Iraq, Kenya, Kuwait, Lebanon, Russia, Singapore, Thailand, and so forth. There were some particularly interesting networks, for instance, like those in Afghanistan and Egypt, because they're actually being rebuilt and reshaped right now. And so you kind of have this surveillance by design, and that you've got, as networks are actually being built and provisioned, you make sure these boxes go in early. I mean, the way most of this was done actually is we used Shodan, which is fantastic if people haven't seen it. It's sort of a search engine for computers. So we used Shodan to search for blue coat, and then we got a couple of rather large boxes and just sort of scanned whole country ranges for blue coat proxies, and then whois, then manual enumeration of each machine. So yeah, as you can see from world map. There's pretty pervasive surveillance capability already. Why all the hacking? So the internet has changed over the last few years, and so has people's behavior on it. A lot of high-risk users are far more aware of tools like Tor, Whisper systems provided encrypted phone communications. The EFF has a plugin called HTTPS Everywhere, which will automatically HTTPS encrypt hundreds of sites. But also sort of Google, Facebook, Twitter, and a variety of really large internet providers went HTTPS by default, right? So a lot of network traffic was encrypted by default, and that means that the efficacy of these type of mass intercept devices was sort of highly reduced. And so active targeting became necessary. So you guys may have heard of this case, but in 2011, in Germany, the CCC analyzed a Trojan, which appeared to have been used by German law enforcement to spy on, and I believe he was allegedly running a steroid smuggling ring. And it was sort of nicknamed the Bundestrojaner or the Start Trojaner. And it was sort of disguised as legitimate software, but could be used to monitor Skype calls and various other aspects of internet use, perform keylogging, and also activate computer hardware like microphones or webcams. So the German authorities initially denied using this tool, but after people went through the required legal process, it was found that officials had deployed this program more than 50 times. Last year, the Dutch Minister of Safety and Justice asked the Netherlands to pass a law allowing police to obtain warrants to install malware on targets' private computers, conduct remote searches on local and foreign computers to collect evidence, and to delete data on remote computers to disable accessibility of illegal files. Like the thing I think that people found most worrying here was the conduct remote searches on local and foreign computers. So the idea of legalized hacking against people outside of their jurisdiction was something that people found highly controversial, and this law was kind of shouted down. But as we can see, this isn't sort of an isolated idea. This means that where there is demand, people will create desired products. Gaddafi's regime snooped on emails and internet chats of Libyan dissidents using invasive technology sold by a French firm. Syrian government used blue coat technology from California, and it seems like Egypt's secret services used technology from a British company to eavesdrop on dissidents. But we'll get into the details of that in just a second. First, I would like to tell you a small story about a country called Bahrain. So Bahrain, was ostensibly on the face of things a nice-looking country in the Persian Gulf, very modern, money, shopping malls, everyone's happy. It even has an Applebee's, which is an American family restaurant. Everyone loves the leadership, apparently. Unfortunately, everything is not great. There was considerable disparity of wealth, as well as political power was not proportionate to the beliefs of the population. And there was a lot of claims of nepotism. Much of the political positions were held within the ruling family and so forth. There was also significant censorship. As you can see, websites blocked for violating laws of the Kingdom of Bahrain. So this makes people unhappy, and so they had protests. And they asked for justice, spoke out against the regime. Unfortunately, and then these were large mass protests, unfortunately this ended up with the Saudi Arabian military rolling in to help quash these protests. And so this is Pearl Roundabout, and this was trashed and bulldozed. And the protests were put down. But they were not only put down, they were pursued. So people who were involved in the protests were pursued by police. And interestingly, online, in that they're both Twitter and Facebook groups dedicated to outing, finding pictures of people in protests and saying these are their real names and these are who they are and that sort of thing. But the protests kind of went on, as did the police raids, and people were tortured and killed. This guy there's a videotaped confession of him broadcast sort of after he was tortured to death. So this sort of violent protests sort of went on, followed by bulldozing of towns and so forth, which leads us to early last year, in April, when a group called Bahrain Watch, who monitor the sale of arms to the Bahrain government and also companies that provide PR for the Bahrain government, started to receive suspicious emails. Some of them appeared to be from Melissa Chan, who's an Al Jazeera journalist. Some of them claimed to be about prominent human rights activists. This one was received by a woman named Allah Shahabi. And so on this contains a meeting.ra, which was a doc file. On the opening of the doc file, this was all that was there. So people were very suspicious because it was a very large doc file with very little text. Lots of pages of blank text, lots of pages of blankness, very little text. So the woman who received this email was a British-born Bahraini activist, and she's an economics lecturer. She's also married to a guy who was imprisoned during the uprising. And so she sent an email to Bahrain Watch saying, I've been hit with what I think is a targeted Trojan on my laptop after receiving 2 dodgy but genuine-looking emails, which I have to admit is just amazingly on the money for someone who's a human rights activist and an economics lecturer. So this was her husband, who was arrested and imprisoned. So this is actually the guy I mentioned before, Bill Marchak, who's in Bahrain Watch. And he's sort of, this is probably something boring. Did you open it or install it? And she'd actually tried opening and installing it, but for some reason had actually not managed to get it to open. So Bill ran it himself, and he was like, oh wow, this actually attempts to connect to this ISP, which belongs to Batelco's ADSL service. Batelco is the state-run telecommunications service in Bahrain. And so Allah was going to tweet about this and ask if anyone else in Bahrain had received similar emails. And Bill was like, maybe we should try. We don't want to spook who's ever doing this. Let's investigate further. And so they contemplated doing a variety of things, right? Like trying to feed false info back to people and this sort of thing, and trying to figure out how they could implicate the government, which And then they decided that what they would do is they would pass this on to a reporter who had been investigating surveillance technologies that had previously written about stuff happening in Bahrain. And he put them on to me. So Bill actually put in this slide, so that's why it looks weird. So I had a look at this Trojan, and I thought that it would be very similar to the Syrian malware that I was working on. I was like, this is probably going to be, kind of boring. I think I was talking to Stefano about this, and, it's like, things do keylogging and, account credential theft and that sort of thing, and he was like, congratulations, it's a malware, So, I mean, a lot of malware performs this type of functionality. So I began with dynamic analysis, which involves running malware inside a virtual machine, monitoring the file system, network, and operating activity, and so forth. And I saw the malware execute and then disappear, and I was like, all right, so it does some things. Let's see, right? And this sort of actually obviously piqued my interest rather than instantly dismissing it, since it had these sort of obvious evasion techniques. But it actually proved to be considerably more complicated than I'd anticipated. There was just this myriad of tricks which someone had used to ensure that analysis and identification of the malware weren't actually easy. So it actually had like custom antivirus evasion in that like a lot of malware writers, what they do is they just simply test their malware against current versions of AV software, and if it doesn't get detected, yay, I performed AV evasion. What this did is it actually checked for running processes of certain types of antivirus software and then performed injection into them to specifically lie to running antivirus. It used a virtualized packer to sort of obscure static analysis of the binary. It caused Ollie debug to crash using not really well known, but kind of known bug. So for those of you that don't know, Ollie debug is a very common debugging tool. So if you opened it and then opened this piece of software in it, it would actually cause the tool itself to crash. And in addition to these things, it sort of performed process injection and modification of the master boot record and that sort of thing. And so, I was like, this is actually a pretty competently written piece of malware and somewhat complex. And so we just sort of kept looking at it out of interest. And then in one of the memory spaces of the infected process, we saw what appeared to be debug strings featuring the word FinSpy. Now, we kind of got excited then because FinSpy was part of a full-featured intrusion and monitoring suite known as FinFisher. And so once we realized, like, oh my God, is this actually FinFisher? Is this FinSpy? I'll sort of go into why that's significant in a second. But we actually decided that we wanted to try to look for similar samples. So the virtual machine that was used to initialize the code for the malware looked custom written and reasonably specific. So we wrote a signature for this, and when we tried to find samples which matched it, we were actually surprised to find a malware sample which talked to these domains. One of which is gammainternational.de, who's the German company that sells FinFisher. And the other which is a domain called FFdemo. So it looked like there had actually been a demo copy of this malware floating around, which was structurally very similar to the malware that we'd found targeting these Bahraini human rights activists. So this led us to be pretty sure that we'd actually identified a copy of FinSpy by FinFisher being used in the wild. And this was actually very, very interesting to a lot of people. What Mikko Hyppinen, who is the chief research officer of F-Secure, said was, we know it exists, but we've never seen it. You can imagine a rare diamond, which is a particularly whimsical quote. But the reason why people were so interested in it was, unlike a lot of other malware found on the internet, this is commercially designed and sold malware for the purposes of intelligence gathering by law enforcement, government, intelligence community. So it's part of this sort of $5 billion a year commercial third-party surveillance industry. And these types of tools offer surveillance against the security-aware, geographically mobile target, i.e., sort of activists and those sort who may not even be around in your country. And the way that FinFisher and other products sort of manage this is persistent backdoor access to people's digital devices. And then this includes not only their laptops and their computers, but also their mobile phones. So there's multiple trade shows for these types of products. And they're kind of showcased at arms fairs and surveillance fairs around the world. This particular one, ISS World, which you can all go attend, or you would be able to if they let you in. I believe it's restricted to law enforcement, telecommunications, and government employees, but there is one in Prague. So product vouchers for these companies that were sort of distributed at these type of things were actually leaked by WikiLeaks in a leak called the Spy Files, which I think was reported on in 2011. However, FinFisher actually gained international notoriety 3 weeks after the fall of Hosni Mubarak's regime in Egypt. So Egyptians stormed the doors of the state security apparatus and ransacked the documents found within. These documents seem to suggest that the Egyptian government had purchased this software, which was written in Munich, from the Gamma International parent company out of the UK. Now, Gamma said that their software is sold only to government and law enforcement, and they comply with export laws. So this was one of the documents found, and you can see 2 State Security Investigation Department, Cairo, Egypt, a remote intrusion solution. And there's the cost of the master license and so forth, including freight of 6,000 euros, which seems steep for software, to a sort of a total of 287,000 euros, which kind of may seem expensive, but is actually, dictator pocket change. So after analyzing and reversing this backdoor and being fairly certain it was this, we started to look at the functionality that the backdoor provided. So we were sort of reverse engineering it. And what was interesting is this is a screenshot. So we had this machine which was connected, infected with the malware and being remotely controlled by this server in Bahrain that we were just watching. So this is actually a screenshot of us running a program monitoring the screenshot being taken. So it just took a screenshot of whatever we were doing on the desktop, and at that time we were monitoring files being written. So we could actually just watch the screenshot being written out at the time. We also saw it performed live audio recording, so if you made Skype calls on the machine, we could actually see audio files being written out. It uses the OGG format, which is open source and lossless, so it's good that they use open source software. In addition to this, we also saw credential stealing for sort of logins for over HTTP and that sort of thing. Specific recording of Skype as well as other types of audio communications. What was interesting is we actually saw it in the modules downloaded from the remote server. So it appeared every time it wanted to do a new type of monitoring, it would download a module from the remote server. We actually saw the path that it was downloaded from, which was actually interesting. So they're obviously using Linux, which is cool. And it was actually, the remote server was called a FinSpy master. So these are the reported capabilities that the software provides. Interestingly, when we were looking at the keylogging functionality, we noticed something, which, as you can see at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen here, we'd been, and attempting to see, let's watch it log some keystrokes. So we typed in FinSpy, and then we saw that in a file. So the malware uses encryption to disguise harvested data. Unfortunately, it looks like that actually implemented a custom encrypted protocol which is frequently dangerous. So the data was written to files using AES. However, there was no padding, so anything that was outside of a 16-block boundary got dumped unencrypted. It also used a reasonably weak seed. It used, for an initialization vector, last clock rate. However, it polled that more frequently than it was updated, making this, as I said, a weak initialization vector. So we were actually able to write code to brute force the crypto and completely reverse the command and control protocol. Where that was interesting is it meant that we could start scanning for FinSpy servers around the world. Now, another group, Rapid7, who are a security group out of Boston, started scanning themselves for FinSpy servers. And they found that a lot of them bizarrely contained the string hello Steffi. And they found FinSpy servers in the following countries: Indonesia, Australia, Qatar, Ethiopia, Czech Republic, Estonia, Japan, Mongolia, Latvia, and the UAE. We did a slightly different thing. So at the time when they performed these scans, when they released it, they said only the Latvian server was still responding, we think as a result of the recent report. Maybe countries have taken these things down. And they weren't able to determine if the servers were related or if the takedowns were related to our report or not. So we decided to perform our own scanning, where we decided to scan the whole world, performing a handshake. So we would claim to be an infected client and see what replied. So for the purposes of this, the infected client is going to be Bill Marchak, who I performed the scanning with, and the FinSpy master is going to be played by this black and white photo of Martin Munch, who is the guy from Munich who wrote the FinSpy software. So we would send remote messages to servers saying, hi, I'm infected with FinSpy, and then Martin would wait for a certain reply, and then we would send these multiple packets, and then we would close the connection, and the remote side would tear it down, and then we would move on to the next one. And so we found, we managed to confirm, we managed to find servers in several of the same countries that Rapid7 had found servers in, as well as in a bunch of new countries. Singapore, a new server in Bahrain, Turkmenistan, 2 servers, Indonesia, and a server in the Netherlands, but we actually thought that it looked by a proxy on a hosting provider and was actually probably not being used directly there. So Rapid7 had said we weren't able to determine whether or not any of these servers was actually being used by a government agency. We just found these servers in those countries. So we were pretty sure, actually, that one of our servers was being used directly by a government agency, because we found a server in a range belonging to the Turkmenistan Ministry of Communications. Now, it's actually really not a very big range, and it looks to be entirely used for government offices, as well as running a FinSpy master. Now, we found this a little bit worrying because Turkmenistan rates really low on democracy indexes around the world, below, in fact, China, Iran, and Syria, and slightly above North Korea. However, despite this lack of openness, the president was recently re-elected with 97% of the vote, and there is at the moment a declared era of supreme happiness. So maybe everything is fine there. Seems like a good dude. So anyway, unfortunately, I was paying for this scanning myself. I tried to get friends of mine to hook me up with big machines and that sort of thing, and people had said, yeah, I will, I'm going to try to do this deal and stuff. And I was just waiting and waiting, and I got really impatient. So I just started, I thought this was the future. And so I plugged my credit card into this website, and I was like, give me a box now. And so I got one. And we were doing this scanning. And unfortunately, if you scan the world, you get complaints. And so, we'd gotten through, we hadn't actually got through, it was actually a reasonably low percentage of the world where we were at that stage. And I got this, which was the, I'm afraid we're, terminating your account. And I was like, oh, come on, we're doing this human rights work, good people. And the guy sort of, showed him the report and stuff, and he was like, well, actually, you guys do seem all right. but I'm not going to let you keep doing this from my network. So, we'll refund you the unused portion of your month's fees, and please never try to rent a box from me again. It's like, it sort of ended all right. And for the blue coat scanning that you saw that I did earlier, I actually went to a different provider, and I got canned again while halfway through this scanning. And actually, they were more reasonable, and they managed to stand up the box. But so, this is a lesson. If you want to survey the whole world, then be prepared to have very interesting discussions with the people who provide you with bandwidth about what you're doing. But it turns out that scanning the whole internet isn't the only way to find things. A human search engine came into play. After we released this data, all sorts of people sent us all sorts of weird stuff, some of which was very interesting, some of which was not. Lots of members of the activist community just started sending us emails with weird attachments, some of which were Ukrainian bank credential theft spyware. And then we came across a bunch of mobile malware, which was interesting enough. And in an iOS backdoor, we found this, which was very interesting because this is an Apple developer certificate that looks to have been issued to Martin Munch, who, as you might remember from the attractive black and white photo that I showed before, is the developer of FinSpy and its product suites based in Munich. And so we were kind of like, ho-ho! In the same backdoor, we actually found references to FinSpy. And further sleuthing revealed a range of mobile backdoors for all the major mobile platforms. And these mobile backdoors provided all sorts of interesting functionality. Call interception, logging of phone calls, logging of text messages, predictably GPS location tracking, you could steal people's address books, determine their social network. The one that I found particularly scary was the invisible microphone. And so the code actually disassembled very cleanly, and it was actually called SpyCall in the code. And so for the purposes of this demonstration, what would happen is the SpyCall would initiate call waiting, and then we're going to use this attractive black and white photo of Martin Munch here. And again, the other part will be played by my friend Bill from Berkeley. And so the phone would initiate call waiting and then initiate a call to a number that was hard-coded into the spyware itself. And there would be a consistent outgoing phone call, just constantly going on your phone. Now, it would cancel all signs of this actually being present. So it would turn off the backlight, it would modify your call logs so you couldn't see that this call was present, and it would cancel a ringer and vibration. And then if an ingoing call came from a legitimate call, and this is my friend Bill, then the spy call would be placed on hold and hardware control would return, and you would get all the rings and vibrations and flashes that you would expect with a normal phone call. And then once that stopped, you would get, the spy call would resume. Interestingly, while analyzing these mobile samples, we found sort of other threads which went in strange and interesting directions. The Symbian backdoor was signed by a certificate issued to a Cyan Engineering Services. When we investigated that, it turned out that Cyan Engineering Services was a company based out of Beirut. And the domain for this was registered to a Mr. Johnny Debs. Investigation of that revealed that Johnny Debs was actually listed on a list of Milpol attendees for a conference in Paris as the media representative, or the media manager, I think, of Finfisher GmbH. So while investigating other malware, we also, the sort of dodgy offshore company thing came up again. In a certificate used to sign a 64-bit implant, we found that it was issued by a company called OPM Security Corporation, based out of Panama. Looking up OPM Security Corporation, this is what they apparently do. They provide personal and institutional security tools in anonymity, and they appear to be owned by the OPM Corporation, providers of offshore services out of Panama. We tried to look more into those guys, and their website is taxhaven.us. So this particular certificate was not found in any FinFisher malware. This was actually found in malware that was found in another country. So there's been sort of some unrest in Morocco, and there was a citizen journalist group that was reporting on it called Mamfakinch. And they had been given a Freedom of Expression Award by Global Voices, and Google had also given them a Freedom of Expression Award for sort of promoting free speech on the internet and in the region. 11 days after this recognition, however, they got an email from their website which wasn't exactly designed to congratulate them for their work. This email sent via the contact form had a single line of French, just like, sort of, please don't mention my name, I don't want any problems, and had a link to a doc, Scandal, promising, scandalous and interesting information. So members of the website's team, who thought they'd been sent a major scoop, tried to open this file. Now, the file itself, interestingly enough, downloaded a backdoor from a remote website. Well, actually, it downloaded shellcode from a remote website, which then downloaded a remote backdoor. And the file that was the remote backdoor actually contained an OS/X backdoor and a Windows backdoor. The OS/X backdoor contained a bunch of debug strings, actually, similar to what we saw before with the FinFisher backdoor, including an Italian name, Guido, who is apparently the name of the developer of the backdoor. And so the fact that it was a cross-platform backdoor looked interesting enough in itself. And so we looked at the Windows variant of this and tried to write a signature for it and that sort of thing. And while poring around, we found a piece of malware that matched, that talked to this address, which was rcs-demo.hackingteam.it. So some of you guys might be familiar with Hacking Team because they're a company that's based out of Milan. And they provide, I'm not going to go into the technical details of their backdoor because it's different, but functionally very similar in functionality to the sort of stuff that FinFisher provides. And I'm not product reviewing, so I'm not going to tell anyone whose is better. But this seemed to suggest that the backdoor was written by these guys, and the web server logs showed that these files had been uploaded by someone in Morocco. Interestingly, Morocco is not the only place this Milan-made backdoor has showed up. The United Arab Emirates hasn't actually faced the same type of street protests that Bahrain did. However, there have been imprisonment of pro-democracy activists. The UAE-5 were 5 Emirati activists who were imprisoned from April to November in 2011 under the charges of insulting the president. One of their number was a guy called Ahmed Mansoor, who was, he served, I believe, 6 to 8 months, but he was initially imprisoned for 3 years for signing a pro-democracy petition. So the news about the FinFisher stuff was translated into Arabic, and he read the news, and he ended up mailing Bahrain Watch because he'd been receiving suspicious emails. And the emails that he'd received were allegedly from an account called Arabic WikiLeaks, which promised important information in terms of attached documents. This contained, the Word document contained an exploit, which then downloaded a second stage, which then downloaded this another stage backdoor. Very similar to the technique that we saw in Morocco. In fact, this actually turned out to be the same backdoor, which is either called Remote Control System or Da Vinci, and is a hacking suite, allegedly, well, this is how it's marketed, as a hacking suite for governmental interception. So they actually had this cool video that I was going to play. So if you look up, I think, Hacking Team Vimeo, then you can actually watch a video of their advertising thing. So what we did is, we wrote articles. We wrote like long blog posts showing analysis of the malware with people like EFF and with Citizen Lab. And this was sort of picked up by various journalistic groups. And so after publication had sort of spread far and wide, as I said, it was translated into Arabic and it was in German, and that sort of thing, usefully, other news organizations started to delve into this. And The Guardian published an article about the offshore links that this company had, showing that they had sort of sub-shell companies in the British Virgin Islands and had been implicated in the sale of surveillance equipment to Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq. And the British government was kind of not particularly impressed with all of this. And so finally, they actually decided to crack down on the sale of this software, and they decided that, before it was sold to any repressive regimes, and they actually had to get permission. Which obviously brings into question all sorts of interesting things about what counts as a repressive regime and when they need to ask permission. So following up on this, the German foreign minister actually called for an EU-wide ban on the export of surveillance software to totalitarian states, which is a really great start. The wording here, as I pointed out before, has agreed that future FinFisher exports to questionable regimes will need government permission. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but I guess it's better than no oversight at all. So, I mean, the results that we sort of hope for from doing this sort of thing, I guess, are the restricting of the activities of bad actors. We get public discourse, and with any luck, we can get better legislation on this. So the reason why I mentioned better legislation is because what they used to restrict the sale of FinFisher were antiquated laws regarding cryptography. You might remember, does anyone remember this? Yeah, so basically a long time ago, software containing encryption products were classified as munitions. Because the idea was that terrorists and bad people would use cryptography to avoid government surveillance. And so this was actually obviously a terrible law because certain things were governed by free speech and certain things weren't. So you got people printing crypto code on T-shirts, singing crypto code in songs, writing crypto code down physically in books and mailing it around the world. And so the law was kind of really terrible. So we actually kind of need better laws on this type of thing. So one of these things we love is obviously for companies that sell this type of product to maybe not sell it to places where they think human rights abuses are likely to occur. That would actually be really great. And also potentially have some culpability for sale of their products if it's happening illegally. Because what we got in the case of Gamma was they alleged that their product had either been stolen, there was stolen demo copies, they'd been distributed without their knowledge, and this type of thing. There's end-use monitoring laws in the US which govern the sale of weapons. If you sell certain types of weapons, you actually have to find out what people are going to do with them. There's no such requirement for people that sell this type of intrusion surveillance technology. And also, a lot of the legislation that presently governs electronic trespass and data acquisition is really antiquated. And it's not that it was bad or written with malicious intent, but the law that governs this, for instance, in the US is almost 30 years old. So this type of online spying was actually simply not countenanced when these laws were written. But the basic thing is that I think it's really important that since this type of spying is now a really big business, just that it not be a secret industry. Because secret spying is kind of the cornerstone of any good police state, and that's probably not desirable to most people. So I'm going to leave you guys with this quote from this EU MP, Marietje Schaake, which is simply that the concept of lawful interception does not apply in countries where the rule of law is absent. I think that's a really good thing to think about when contemplating the sale of Western technologies to repressive regimes. So on that really cheerful note, like, I didn't do all this work alone, so there's a bunch of people that I'd like to thank. And I've stuck these in the slides, so if they're available from the site download, you can kind of look at a bunch of the news reports on this. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, then, don't be shy.